We continue to read literary masterpieces because they are works of imagination in which we discover the truth about ourselves and our interactions with others.
Andrew, before we take our close look at Antigone, let's talk about the context in which ancient audiences would have seen this play.
Yeah, the cultural context is essential. It's religious. The plays were written and performed to come after the great religious festivals in Athens, which was the festival of Dionysius, in which there were ritual sacrifices performed. And then these plays were written about, around and about their foundational myths. And again, for the Athenians, these are not myths, this is their belief system. And the plays dramatize that, but they bring it down to the human level, which, for instance, in this play, there's a lot of talk about the gods. There are no gods. In some plays, there are gods. But what the plays do when you have a writer like Sophocles, he sees certain patterns and certain structural elements, and that creates a dramatic situation rather than just, say, a narrative line. And by the way, the playwrights competed for prizes, and a big winner was Sophocles, and Euripides after him, Aeschylus before him, which is why we have these. They're cultural monuments. And we can talk a lot about that, but we have this idea of literature, and we include these masterpieces, not because of their religious import, but because precisely of their beauty. What culture has intuited is that we admire these for the way they're done, for the way they're made. And we have a sense that, that they're beautiful and that they're also the bearers of certain truths, not actual facts on the ground. None of these characters existed in history. They exist for the Greeks, but not for us. But the patterns of behavior that are studied in these works, and that's what we're going to talk about at considerable length, particularly with Sophocles.
Aristotle gave a definition of tragedy as the imitation of an action.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. He begins in his Poetics by saying that man is the most imitative of all animals, which is true. Frankly, science and social science and neuroscience has borne that out. And then he goes on to say that the tragedy is an imitation of an action, and by action he means plot. And he insists that plot supersedes character. The plays are plot-driven, and characters are, in a sense, a function of their position in the play vis-a-vis other characters. The main thing about tragedy, for Aristotle, it's very clear, is that at the core is human interaction. And the things that we learn from these plays, we can still use, let's say, as a reference for understanding how we interact. And obviously, we'll get into some detail about that.
Well, and when we approach plays often through a modern lens, a modern approach to this, we tend to have gotten into a habit of looking for the good guy and the bad guy, the hero and the evil one. Is that, what, if we approach Antigone that way, what might we miss?
Well, we miss its central truths. In Greek theater, in Greek tragedy, there are no good guys and bad guys. That's melodrama. What you just described as melodrama, and it's full of sex and violence, and good guys and bad guys, and in order to succeed for the box office, the good guys have to win. Here you have a tragic conflict precisely because there are no good guys, bad guys. We'll see how each of the characters gets into a situation where things become more and more angry and violent, but that's not their temperament, it's not their character, it's about interaction. And our entertainment business is so focused on the good guy, bad guy nexus. These plays are a very good antidote to that kind of delusion. The beginning of the play that all the Greeks know. That is to say, the sons of Oedipus, Eteocles and Polynices, inherit the throne, and Eteocles is the younger, Polynices is the older, so in order of business it should be Polynices first, or they should be able to share it. Now there's a problem about that, because sovereignty is not something that is by definition shareable. If you have a monarchy, that means monos, there's one. And so Eteocles throws his brother out of the city so that he can be king. Polynices recruits a foreign army to take back the throne from his brother. So you have brother against brother. You have something that looks like a national war because, of course, it's a foreign army. But the leader of the army is a rightful heir to the throne. Both of them, and the play is very emphatic about the fact both of them are killed by each other's hands. I'll give you one example from the text. He says, this is Ismene, Antigone's sisters. The two of us were robbed of two brothers, gone in a day by a double blow. They're each killed by each other's hands. And so the sons of Oedipus, the heirs to the throne, are dead. And Creon, was Oedipus's brother-in-law, by default inherits the throne. And that's where the play begins. We should talk about precisely what's he going to do. There's blood all over the place. How is he going to restore order? Because there's nothing more disorderly than two brothers fighting over a throne.
And there's no winner if they're both dead.
Well, that's absolutely essential. I'll give you another quote to make it very clear that Sophocles is very sensitive to this non-difference, this crisis of difference. Here it is again. He says, "And last, our two brothers," this is Ismene, "our two brothers dead in a single day, both shedding their own blood. Poor suffering boys battling out their common destiny hand to hand." You see, it's the tragedy of violent twins. It's a tragedy, it's a crisis of difference. Who shall rule? And Creon comes into the throne in the aftermath, and he has to restore order.
Yes.
And of course, he has restored order by saying, well, you have a good brother who is here, Eteocles, inside the city, and the bad one who comes from the outside, threatening the city. So he says that Eteocles is a defender of the city, and Polynices is the enemy of the city. And so he restores the friend-enemy difference, which every city, every culture relies upon. So we'll talk more about that as we go in, but that this ancient quarrel is a quarrel that we find all the time. The violence which threatens the city from without unifies the city. The violence that threatens the city from within divides the city and could destroy the city. And I'll quote a passage from Creon about just that fact. The Greeks had a terrible fear of faction, of partisans, of vendetta, you see. And one of the functions of sacrifice is to put an end to that kind of thing. And by the way, this is a conversation we're having about René Girard's mimetic theory. And it's not a theory that is sort of dumbed down into the text. It's really just a question of close reading. Now, this is Creon speaking to his son at the particular time. He says, whoever steps out of line, violates the laws, or presumes to hand out orders to his superiors, he'll win no place from me. But that man the city places in authority, his orders must be obeyed, large and small. Otherwise, you don't have an order. Anarchy, show me a greater crime on earth. She destroys cities, rips up houses, breaks the ranks of spearmen into headlong rout. And he goes, anarchy is chaos. There's no culture possible if everybody is fighting for sovereignty. So once you have a king, everyone needs to obey that person and believe in the authority that that person exercises.
Absolutely, because as you say, that authority to designate the friend-enemy difference, if everyone's fighting over the right to say who's the friend and who's the enemy, all you have is chaos.
Right, so his decree clears the air.
This is it.
And his decree outrages Antigone because this is her brother. And by the way, the decree is this, that Eteocles will receive all rights of burial and honor, and Polynices is left out to rot in the dust as roadkill, as carrion, which is to say he's reduced to a non-human state. And that works, it's good political rationality, but it obviously doesn't work for his sister, you see, because she simply cannot accept that. So she is outraged, on the one hand, by Creon's decree. She's scandalized by it. And by the way, scandal is a chief idea in mimetic theory. Scandal is something that sometimes is contagious. She is scandalized by Creon's decree, and Creon, obviously, is scandalized by her transgression. Now, he's just been like king for a day. He's just cleared up the mess out there and reestablished the difference between good and bad violence. And along comes someone who violates his decree. So we find him very hot and angry, but frankly, a person in his position would also react the way he does.
Yeah, I think that remembering the context for the play, as you say, that there's blood all around.
Yes.
I mean, we're the day after the end of this war,
Yes.
in which brother killed brother. The term, in the translation that I read, Andrew, the term enemy of the state was used.
Yes.
And I love that because
Yes.
we understand that
Yes.
today in our modern context, we want to know who the enemy of the state is, so we know who to fight, who to be against.
Yes.
And it pulls us all together as
Yes.
a community, as
Yes.
a country.
Well, precisely, and that gets us to the question that we still have to deal with between not good guys and bad guys. Well, that's the way we like to slice it up. But between good violence and bad violence. Mm-hmm. Good violence unites the people, and bad violence divides the people. So the distinction between the good violence and the bad violence is made by Creon. The bad violence, obviously, is what comes against the people, and Eteocles defending the city. The problem is that that is an arbitrary decision, and Creon is very aware, by the way, that this is something that he has to do, and that is something that he has to be very tough about.